In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind.
It's time for our Sports Page Summer of College Football. It's presented by Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes. You can find Buddy Gregg on Twitter at Buddy Gregg RVs, on their Facebook page, or at buddygregg.com. This is day number 2. We previewed the Florida Gators yesterday. Time to talk Kentucky Wildcats football. We bring in from the Louisville Courier-Journal, covers the Kentucky Wildcats. You can find his work also on Twitter. It's Kyle Tucker _CJ. Kyle Tucker joins us here on the new Sentinel Sports Page. Hey, Kyle, Vince, and Jesse Smithey. How you doing, Kyle?
Great. How are you?
We're great, Kyle. Appreciate you helping us out with our preview today. And we played Mark Stoops. I don't know if you heard him coming in. Yeah. Just give me your thoughts on how good a job Mark Stoops has done to this point to get Kentucky players and fans excited and optimistic about the future of Kentucky football.
Yeah, I would say it's unlikely he could have done any better without seeing a game. You know, he obviously hasn't coached in a game yet, and I think this season is going to be a real challenge for him. But in terms of all the other things, pretty incredible. I mean, obviously getting 50,000 people to the spring game, a game that they announced 4,500 for the year before, and there probably were only about 1,500 there. Considering there were only 38,000 people combined in the last two actual home football games. Actual attendance about 38,000 to end last season, to get 50,000 there for a spring game. Pretty incredible. I mean, the staff that he's hired has kept people excited. He brought in Neil Brown, a hometown kid who played here at Kentucky, who was running an exciting offense at Texas Tech. To run his offense, he brought, he convinced another assistant at Florida State to come from a program like Florida State to Kentucky, DJ Elliott, to run his defense, and then he hired a bunch of other young, hungry recruiter-type guys, and they've immediately started tearing it up on the recruiting trail. They made Ohio a priority, which, as the northernmost school in the SEC, you have to do, and they hadn't done. They only had 4 guys from Ohio on their roster last year, and they've gone in and gotten, I think they've already got 6 commitments from top 35 players in the state of Ohio in this class, and they've rocketed up the rankings. They're getting 4-star players, which they never got. In his 6 months, he's landed 8 4-star recruits. It took 7 years before he got here for them to get that many. And for a fleeting moment yesterday, they're number 1 in the recruiting rankings, which is absolutely unheard of. The highest ranked class before Mark Stoops ever in the Rivals era for Kentucky was 36th, and most of their classes are in the 50s. So it's pretty remarkable. To answer your question, it is almost unthinkably good at a program with such little tradition as Kentucky.
I mean, how are they doing this, though? I think the most important thing when you look at that lineup of 17 commitments is that they all have a minimum of 3 stars.
Yep. Yeah, and more than that, one thing that I did, sort of an analysis that I wrote about last week, was I stayed up one night and went through every offer that every recruit that he's gotten a commitment or signed since he got here, 30 plus now, and then compared those to the last 30 or so of Joker Phillips recruits. And really the interesting thing is, who else are they beating? And I looked at BCS offers, and the average guy that Mark Stoops and his staff have gotten commitments come 10.5 BCS scholarship offers, and the ones under Joker Phillips averaged 3.5 or 3.9. They were most frequently beating out MTSU, Florida International for players under the previous staff, really historically. Now beating out Wisconsin, Nebraska, West Virginia. They've beaten, those are the teams. Louisville, they're beating regularly, and here and there they've beaten out Florida State, Ohio State. They flipped the guy that was committed to Southern California on signing day last year. I don't know if they're doing it. I know that they've got a lot of. They went very young, much I think about a decade younger than Joker Phillips' staff. Stoops said he wanted to get three guys that had improved. He's done some smart things. He's found some guys with connections. He hired a junior college defensive line coach who immediately brought with him the top defensive end in the country last year, who will be probably one of the best players on the roster, Zadarius Smith. a huge difference maker that you look at in spring ball and can tell he's already a different kind of athlete than they have on this team. He brought in Vince Marrow, who played high school football with Mark Stoops in Youngstown, Ohio, at Courier High School, big program there. Those two guys' name carries a lot of weight in the state of Ohio. Merrill went to high school there. He played at Toledo. He coached at Toledo, coached high school ball there, and he was really up on the recruiting trail, bringing in Ohio kids to Nebraska. And so Mark Stoops went and stole him, and he has immediately made a huge impact. I mean, many of their recruits have come from the state of Ohio, just a place that they've never had an impact before. But when you bring in an assistant, such deep ties, and head coach, his name carries such weight in that state. Strategically, Ohio has just been a thing that they have swung and missed on. So huge, I think, to their abilities, because by and large, they're not going to go down to Louisiana and Georgia and Florida consistently and all the best players down there. They'll get here and there, but I think they have a chance to sell something being an hour away from Patty and say, if you want to come down here and play in the SEC, or do you want to go play in the Big Ten, which loses to the SEC when it comes to the big games. You know, I think that's a selling point that they've started to have. They're having success with it. Just
real quick, because we need to get to this year's team. But did you say that Kentucky has in 6 months they have 8 4-star recruits, as opposed to it taking them 7 years to do that before? Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
okay.
They've gotten. Yeah, at the end of last year's class, they got 3, and then they've gotten 5 or less, and so 6, and they're 8 4-star kids. That's just on Rivals. They have more if you count some of the other services. But yeah, 8 4-stars in 6 months compared to 8 in the 7 years before he got here. So it's a pretty dramatic turn. I mean, this is uncharted territory for them on the recruiting trail, and I think what remains to be seen will be how they hold the class together when I think, and probably a segue here into this year's team, when they start to struggle in the fall, because I think it's going to happen. They've got a murderer's row of a schedule, and they're just, quite frankly, not very talented. I mean, I told you about the difference in recruits. Well, this roster right now is the one that's filled with all of those recruits that are being MTSU and Florida International for.
Well, let's talk about that. With Neil Brown's air raid offense, as you refer to, the skill positions aren't there. What's the hope, if any, about those important positions to execute that offense?
Well, I mean, they're going to rely a lot on freshmen. They have 3 freshmen and a junior college wide receiver coming in. They are painfully thin. They had some defects, some graduations. They're down to 4 scholarship wide receivers until the freshmen arrive. Even when the freshmen and the junior college guys show up, they will have 8. And their coaches said in the fall that ideally with this offense, spreading guys out and the tempo they want to run, they need 10 to 12 who can play at a given time, and they're only going to have 8 total on scholarship, and 4 of those will be newcomers. And the wide receivers coach said this is the best opportunity in America for a walk-on to try to play wide receiver here right now. So they had an outfielder on the baseball team who was a good all-state football player in high school who just quit baseball and is walking on to play wide receiver because he sees an opportunity. I think it's going to be a struggle. I think they've got some really good running backs. I think they have a decent stable of running backs, including a big-time freshman coming in. They've got 3 good options at quarterback. I think whoever comes out of that battle will be able to run this offense pretty well. Jalen Whitlow is the guy that really shined in the spring game and really adds a wrinkle because he's a very, very good athlete, a very good runner, fast, very quick and elusive, and has really improved his passing. He looked very, very polished as a passer compared to what we'd seen in the past when he was forced to play as a true freshman last year. And so I think they have some options at quarterback, but the real question for offense, I think, is, who are going to be the guys or the guy at wide receiver. There just aren't very many of them. I'm not sure that. I think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. And defensively, it's the same thing, skill position. I think in the secondary, they're just not good enough. Certainly not up to Mark Stoops' standards. He specializes in the secondary and has coached a ton of NFL guys. He coached Miami, that team that had all those unbelievable players in the early 2000s that won a national championship. And you had some great ones at Florida State, and he comes here, and you could just hear in his voice during the spring when you asked him about to sort of evaluate his talent that he wasn't real high on it.
You know, as I did some show prep to talk with you today about Kentucky football, you look at, I found a depth chart from kind of late November of last season. Just counted up the number of guys coming back just off of that chart alone. Seemed to be 8 offense, 7 defense. You know, having talked with you now, just hearing the struggles at wide receiver depth and other places as well. I mean, can these guys even win an SEC game this year?
I think it'll be tough. I mean, I do not think that's a game. I sense from talking to them that they're sort of bracing for what's to come. They are, I think, nervous because they know they're not talented enough, and they especially know they're not very deep. And when you play in the SEC, the guys are going to get hurt, you know. And if the wrong guy gets hurt, then it all really falls apart. I mean, it's a house of cards at best right now for them. And then you just look at the stretches that they have in their schedule. There's a 4-game stretch where they play Florida, Louisville, South Carolina, all in a row, and then Mississippi State is the next game. If you count that, I think that's probably top 5 teams in the first 4, probably preseason top 10 teams, and they're playing them all in a row early in the year. And that could really, by the midway point of the season, they could be, you know, 1-5, 2-4, and completely deflated. I mean, don't forget they're also squaring off to start the season, game 1. Against the guy that many UK fans wanted Kentucky to hire, Bobby Petrino at Western Kentucky, and that's a dangerous game because you know they're not going to really have any film. They're not going to know exactly what to expect from Western Kentucky, and that's a Western Kentucky team, a roster which is back from upsetting Kentucky last fall in Lexington, and so this is going to be a struggle, I think. I think if they went 4-8, it would be a pretty big success for them, quite frankly, because it's going to be tough to do with the roster they have and the schedule that's lined up in front.
Real quick, what are the chances Deshaun Mobley from Powell High School here in Knoxville maybe cracks the starting lineup this year?
I don't know about the starting lineup, but I do think he'll play. I think he was disappointed, and some fans are disappointed that he didn't do more last year. He's such an impressive athlete and a specimen. He's one of the handful of guys that when you see him come off the bus, he certainly looks like an SEC player. And you know well how impressive his high school stats were. He started to show up a little bit, I think, in spring ball. He had a solid spring game. He got more touches in that spring game, I think, than he did in our season last year. Sort of a wasted freshman season, but at least he got out there and got some experience. I think I like him. I think he gives them an interesting option. He catches the ball well enough. He's got enough speed, and then he's obviously very powerful. So I think you'll see him be a factor in that backfield. Raymond Sanders is probably going to be the guy as a senior. He's got over 1,000 yards in his career and real quick guy who can sort of contribute in the passing game, which a running back's going to have to do in this air raid. I wondered if Mobley would sort of be phased out with the air raid offense if he wasn't maybe a bad fit for it, but I think they do like him. Justin Taylor, running back, the former Alabama commitment that they had that came in with Mobley, is actually the odd man out. He's transferred out, but Mobley is still there, and so I think he'll certainly get his chances in the fall.
Visiting with Kyle Tucker from the Louisville Courier-Journal, helping us with our Kentucky preview on the Sports Page Summer of College Football, brought to you by Buddy Gregg RVs and Motorhomes. Real quick, Mark Stoops is talking about how we're pretty good on the lines. Talk about the offensive line, the defensive line. Hit on those in terms of what Kentucky brings to the table in 2013.
Yeah, I think they've got some good young players on the offensive line. I think the left side, Darian Miller, is a guy that they've talked about since he got there. He played as a true freshman. He'll now be a junior. Being a guy who's maybe an NFL prototype, a guy who has real potential at the next level. You know, an interesting thing, Kentucky had not had an offensive lineman drafted since 1993 before Larry Warford was taken this year. And, I think Darian Miller will not let that drought continue. So they've got some good young talent, but, this year's draft did take away their best lineman in years. Larry Warford, an All-American at guard, and their center, Matt Smith, a 3-year starter there. Both those guys are gone, so those are huge holes for them to fill. I think center is probably the biggest question. They right now have a redshirt freshman penciled in at the number 1 spot there, and they've worked out one of their veteran guards to see if he can do it as well. I think they're a little bit worried about center. They tried to get a JUCO center and couldn't. And so that's going to be a little bit perilous, I think. He's sort of the quarterback of your offensive line, and that's an important position. And again, in great offense, they try to take back the center, read the defense, make some of the calls. And so, if you don't have a guy you can count on there at center, it can certainly be tough. Defensive line, though, I think is going to be a huge upgrade. They have 2 big SEC-sized, I think, and caliber defensive tackles in Dante Rumpf and Mr. Cobble. And what they've really lacked for a long time, I believe, is a legitimate pass rush. And now they've got a couple of ends, I think, that can be difference makers. They've moved Bud Dupree from linebacker back to probably his more natural position, defensive end. He's the biggest playmaker, I think, returning on their defense, and he'll be rushing off the end, probably 6'3", 6'4", 250, 260 pounds. And then they added, as I mentioned earlier in the show, number 1, number 2 junior college defensive end, Darius Smith, guy who had offers from Oklahoma and Alabama and Florida State, and he was a big-time player. They had a connection there. They hired his junior college position coach as their defensive line coach, Jimmy Broombaugh, former Auburn player, and they got him to sit down and that could be a difference maker. I think he is really going to be an impact player for them right away. He looked great in spring ball. He looks, just eyeball test, he just looks so much different than so many of the other players on this roster. Again, talk about guys that look like they can play in the SEC. There aren't a lot of them here, but he is one of them and really stands out. I think their defensive line will be a major upgrade over a year ago.
Kyle, we wish we had more time with you, but really appreciate your insights. Kyle Tucker _CJ is where you can follow him on Twitter. Louisville Courier-Journal covering the Kentucky Wildcats, helping us with our Kentucky preview today.